90.7 KPFK, Los Angeles.
The following radio program has been approved for broadcast by the Federal Communications Commission and is in compliance with all community standards.
From Los Angeles,
Cary Harrison.
Russia, if you're listening.
Talk show, random, political, outrageous, philosophical, analytical, passionate, sunsets, roadkill cooking tips, open-minded, swordsman, bent, resolute, chocolate, bushwhacker, belt buckles, investigative, companion, fearless. Call in. Piercing the cloud of mainstream entertainment. It's the Cary Harrison Files.
And it is the Cary Harrison Files. Welcome. So glad to be with you, and almost Happy New Year, depending when you're watching this, listening to this. It may already be 2026. Well, we're going to have some fun today. We're live streaming, as you know, right now on Substack and YouTube. You can simply Google Cary Harrison, Cary spelled like Cary Grant, C-A-R-Y Harrison, Substack or YouTube, and that way we can stay connected when you arrive at your destination. Also, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at CaryHarrison.com. CaryHarrison.com. There you're going to get a transcript of this entire show, plus access to clips and stuff that we simply can no longer do on the radio side of that. That would be the terrestrial radio, as in FM. And that's our newsletter at CaryHarrison.com. Well, today I'm going to have a ball. Why? Because it's some selections from my upcoming book, A MAGA History of the United States. Yes, it's not going to be that serious, but it is going to be filled with real stuff. It's about America's origin story, the one that they print on money and teach to children like it's a bedtime prayer. Yeah, that one. And we're going to read the fine print out loud together, and we're going to do it slowly with a flashlight. So sit back, relax, like they say on a plane. Sit back, relax, like you're on a plane. What are you going to do? Lean forward, bolt forward, rigidly for 3 hours? No. They just say that because it makes it sound good. So I'm going to have you do the same thing, especially if you're driving, multitasking, texting while driving, smoking, looking at the great. Enjoy this as your roadmap. So let's start with the American history of the Salem witch trials. All of this is a metaphor to what's going on for today. We know that. So the past is literally repeating itself, just on interesting new Technicolor steroids. Starting with the Salem witch trials, a group project in mass hysteria. By the late 1600s, the Pilgrim experiment had curdled into full-blown Puritan paranoia. They'd survived starvation, frostbite, and the Atlantic. With nothing left to colonize, they turned inward. Salem was a town where crops failed, winters dragged on, and everyone monitored everyone else like God's neighborhood watch. All it needed was a spark. What it got was 2 bored girls and a servant who understood drama. When accusations started flying, nobody asked if the girls were sick. Science was not invited to the party. Spectral evidence, dreams, visions, vibes, that was admissible. Confession? Well, it saved you. Denial got you hanged. Justice became community theater with a fatal budget. Now, you could be accused for sneezing during prayer, owning a cat with attitude, or most efficiently, being a woman over 40 with land and no husband. 19 were hanged. 1 man was pressed to death for refusing to plead. The courts congratulated themselves. Eventually, the hysteria ended, not because of reason, but because accusations crept upward. Funny how morality returns once landowners get nervous. Salem wasn't a fluke, it was a rehearsal. A witch hunt is just Puritan karaoke. Everyone gets a turn, and someone always dies. I'm sharing with you some segments from the book I'm writing, a MAGA History of the United States. I did before, going all the way back to the Pilgrims, how they got trapped in Holland for 12 years, not taught to us in school for very good reason. And now we're picking it up at the Salem witch trials or witch hunts. We're having a cheeky frolic into how we got to where we are, worthy of examination through the finest proctoscope. Let's jump now to the Founding Fathers. Enlightenment, with exceptions. The American Revolution didn't just create a nation. It launched one of history's most ambitious rebranding campaigns. Jefferson, Washington, Franklin, Hamilton, Madison. These are names that are carved into currency and concrete. Men who stitched together Enlightenment philosophy. French wine, of course, unpaid labor, sure, why not? And then sold it as destiny. They talked about liberty constantly. Liberty was the word of the century. But the liberty they meant was a private club, gentlemen only. Membership required land, whiteness, and a strong dislike of taxes, unless you were the one collecting them. Jefferson wrote, "All men are created equal," while owning over 600 human beings, including Sally Hemings, whom he legally owned and repeatedly impregnated. Enlightened? Maybe. Consensual? Absolutely not. He wrote about slavery's moral rot while keeping Monticello running because ideals are lovely until they require manual labor. I'm going to point out that my family was one of the first to touch soil here. My mother's side came over in the Mayflower. My father's side sent from England to help develop Maryland, what we call Maryland now, Maryland. So we were naughty like this too. So it's a self-assessment as well. Let's look at George Washington, the general who would not be king. He wore dentures harvested from enslaved people. He freed his slaves in his will after his death, which is the moral equivalent to apologizing in a sealed envelope marked "too late." Ben Franklin, one of my favorites. He invented bifocals and libraries and apparently contracted syphilis in every available French salon. He owned slaves early, found abolition late, right around the time it became fashionable in Philadelphia to pretend you'd always opposed it. I once met a Franklin descendant who had the Franklin family Bible. This was at my grandparents' house down in Florida when I was a little kid. And that Franklin family Bible was complete with ledgers detailing Ben's income as a professional, what he called himself, whoremaster. Education is a hell of a thing. Good old Ben. Hamilton opposed slavery in theory and rented enslaved people in practice. Madison owned over 100 human beings while writing about liberty's delicate balance. The irony wasn't subtle, it was structural. Today, they created a government by the people, for the people, as long as the people excluded women, the Black Americans, indigenous nations, and anyone without property. And yet, here's the rub. They did build something that lasted. That's the American contradiction. Men who designed democracy while barricading the door behind them. Enlightenment thinkers with plantation schedules. Visionaries with blind spots big enough to drive a republic through. Now, we honor them not because they were good, but because they were audacious. And in America, audacity counts as virtue. You're listening to the Cary Harrison Files, CaryHarrison.com. And yes, this is the origin story of who, what we are, and why we are what we are today. Let's jump to the American Revolution. Tea, tantrums, and the bill that France ended up paying. France? Now, let's clear the incense. This wasn't a revolution. Not the way we're taught in our wonderful myths. It was a colonial meltdown, a fiscal tantrum with muskets. One tax hike, and Boston hallucinated itself as Sparta. Dock workers started quoting Locke as if they'd been raised in philosophy seminars instead of rum warehouses. No taxation without representation, they screamed, while owning people, silencing women, and keeping representation chained out back with the livestock. George III, King George, was confused, which is fair. He'd acquired the colonies the traditional way: conquest, paperwork, blood. To him, America wasn't oppressed. It was an ungrateful adolescent who ate at the table and then tried to stab dad over allowance negotiations. So America dumped tea into the harbor like a drunken frat stunt and ran off with France, specifically Lafayette, a teenage aristocrat with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever and the combat experience of a dinner guest. I'm sharing with you some segments from the book that I'm writing, A MAGA History of the United States. What a great title, huh? I mean, why not? It's a cheeky frolic into how we got to where we are today. No need for me to break down the current bunch building ballrooms. Any good grifter can claim there's a permission slip in the Constitution and even get the Supreme Court to agree. And so we have seen. Back to how it all started. France didn't back America out of love for liberty. This is during right around our Revolutionary War time. And that's the bedtime story, isn't it? France backed because Britain was bleeding and Versailles smelled opportunity. Ships, guns, gold, credit. France handed it over chanting liberty, while meaning anything that humiliates England. America smiled, wrote pamphlets, declared destiny. France forgot to feed its people. Versailles glittered while bread vanished. The treasury collapsed. The peasants noticed. And while Americans toasted freedom and borrowed French wine, France stared at the bill and realized it had financed its own execution. Liberty is a lovely word, but it's never free. Someone always pays. We're going to pause in just a couple of minutes, but not quite yet. When we do, we're going to look at the Constitution. But right now, let's enjoy friction, fire, and the cost of being done. We're live streaming right now on Substack and YouTube, by the way. You can simply Google Cary Harrison Substack or YouTube, and that way we'll stay connected when you arrive at your destination. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at caryharrison.com. There you're going to get a transcript of this entire broadcast, plus some access to clips and stuff that we can no longer do on the radio during these modern times. And that's our newsletter at caryharrison.com. I'm sharing with you some segments from the book that I'm writing, A MAGA History of the United States, our little mirthful mayhem into how we got to where we are today. In part one, we met the founders, the idealists with blind spots and investment portfolios. They were called the Pilgrims, my ancestors, probably yours too. And now we meet the system that they built, and then we watch what America does with it. Checks, balances, and people who can't read. The Constitution was engineered like a Swiss watch by men who deeply distrusted human nature. Power was split, diluted, it was restrained, it was shackled. They assumed ambition attracts idiots the way manure attracts flies. Hence the Constitution. But then America handed it to the flies. What they didn't anticipate, because it would have sounded like satire, was a future citizenry that treated literacy as optional and volume as proof. People quoted amendments they'd never read. They skipped others like commercials. Sorry, I'm amusing myself. And they declared the rest up for interpretation, which is historically what fools say before lighting something on fire. Checks were obstacles. Courts were elitist. Aren't we hearing that today? Accountability was communism with punctuation. Enter the selective originalist. He worships the founders like a teenager worships a band he's never listened to. He loves the Second Amendment loudly, the first when convenient, and treats the other amendments like a menu written in French. He adores freedom until someone else exercises it. The system, meanwhile, works exactly as designed. Slow, noisy, infuriating. Laws stall. Courts interfere. Executives get told no. America's most traumatic syllable. The Constitution never relied on virtue. It was built to survive stupidity. And so far, it still mostly has. Barely, but mostly has. It was built to function in slow motion like this so that we're seeing now couldn't be successfully completed at the speed of light. You're listening to the Cary Harrison Files, CaryHarrison.com. This is the part where the paperwork meets the blood. The Civil War. America tries to kill itself. By the mid-1800s, the United States was a group project collapsing in real time. The North industrialized. The South clung to slavery. The West shot buffalo and pretended not to notice the screaming. Slavery was the corpse at the table. The South called it a peculiar institution. The North abolished it, but kept the racism. Now, Abraham Lincoln didn't run to end slavery. He ran to preserve the Union. The South saw him coming and flounced out anyway, clutching constitutions that they hadn't read. Thus began America's 4-year suicide attempt by cannonball. It was mud, it was dysentery, it was amputations performed with whiskey and optimism. Gettysburg shattered the illusion. Lincoln redefined the nation in 272 words. The Union won, Lincoln was murdered, the slaves were free, the country was whole, barely. We're sharing right now some segments from the book that I'm writing, A MAGA History of the United States. If you're just joining us, it's a little frolic into how we got to where we are today. No need for me to break down the current bunch building ballrooms. You get it. The past is the present, and it will be the future here. Let's jump to Reconstruction and how we lost our nerve. Slavery, it turns out, was dead, on paper anyway, which is America's least binding reality. And you're going to hear me have a sip of coffee here, which is not in my writing. It's in my real audio. An espresso machine for Christmas. And I'm going to use that thing until it burns out in about 3 days from now. Amendments during Reconstruction were passed, rights were promised, freed people built schools, they voted, they ran for office, and white America panicked. Enter the Ku Klux Klan, terrorism in a bedsheet. Ballots were answered with bullets. States' rights became code for continued violence. The federal government noticed briefly, then it got bored, and in 1877, Reconstruction was sold out in a backroom deal. Troops withdrew, white elites reclaimed power, and Jim Crow arrived, meticulously engineered and violently enforced. You see, America didn't miss the opportunity. It abandoned it, and history took notes. This isn't a story of villains and heroes. It's a story of people that were brilliant, they were cruel, they were visionary, they were cowardly, and they built systems they didn't fully understand and then dared the future to clean up the mess. And the future did, with interest. You're listening to the Cary Harrison Files. Welcome if you're just joining us on terrestrial radio. If you're live streaming, you can pause, go back, start at the beginning. It's all good. You can go to CaryHarrison.com for more. To get our newsletter, I've been sharing with you some segments from the book I'm writing, A MAGA History of the United States, a frolic in how we got to where we are today. We're going to pause because there's way more to come. So glad you're here. We're going to open up the phones a little later, too, because you've got, well, weeks and weeks of pent-up stuff you've seen, you've thought about, and I'm just setting the table for how we got to where we are today. And I want to hear what you have to say coming up. I'm going to finish up with World War I, World War II, and then we're going to open the phones at the bottom of the hour at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Cary Harrison with you, and this is the Cary Harrison Files.
This pussy grabs back. The Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
Listen, well, it's still legal.
The Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
And it is the Cary Harrison Files, CaryHarrison.com. I'm reading to you from some segments from my book that I'm writing. I've become obsessed. I've been saying for like 2 years that I want to write this book called A MAGA History of the United States. It's satirical, but it's exactly pretty much what happened. But it has to be done in a way where we can like consume it, swallow it. And it's like super important, but my muse would not visit. I'm telling you, if you remember the Greek humanities, my muse just abandoned me. I have not been able to write. I mean, I write monologues every week. I love it, but that's about it. But actually organizing it. So this thing is just writing itself. I am like over omelets, bonding with my Nespresso machine, having sex with the plastic. No, actually not. But if I could, I would. I love this thing so much, I can't even tell you. But I've just been writing and writing and writing, and it's just pouring out, and it's just pent up generations of stuff, apologia for really bad behavior, but explaining the why of it all. The what? Well, it's on CNN. It's everywhere. What? A lot of it is nonsense, tweets, this, that. But this is how we built ourselves and where we're going to end up. We're going to open the phones in, about 10 minutes and take a bunch of your calls, okay? I just want to continue a little bit, bring us more or less up to World War II so that we can get current. But how we got to where we were is so amazing and important. Let's get to the French Revolution, shall we? We were talking a little bit about Enlightenment, the founding fathers, warts, wigs, whips, and all. Yeah, the founding daddies, right? My ancestors, and some of you listening, yours too. We're just like forbidden to actually think about it. Actually, we're forbidden to think about anything in school. Here's what's been published in the textbooks. It's the official version. Memorize it, spit it back. If you spit it back accurately as it was written, you got a high grade. If you actually use critical thinking and wonder, wait a minute. George Washington didn't have wooden teeth. He actually had teeth made from the teeth of slaves. They didn't tell me that in history. So that's what we're talking about. The reality of it all and how we got to, where we are today. We're going to jump into my chapter 10B. I like chapter 10, A, B, C, D, before you go to 11, because there's so much in between that's fascinating, like checks, balances, and the sudden rise of people who can't read. We got into that. You don't have to be able to read. Let's talk about manifest destiny. Here we are. It's the 1800s, and we mistook theft for divine mandate, didn't it? This land is our land because God says so, apparently. If you're Native American or just not white at all, you're going to kind of get this in a special way. By the early 1800s, America had survived a revolution, a constitution, and at least one serious flirtation with monarchy dressed up as democracy. And still, it wasn't satisfied. It had the East Coast, but the East Coast had rules. It had laws. It had tea. It had colleges. What it really wanted was elbow room and buffalo and gold and anything not already bolted down. So the nation collectively turned its bloodshot eyes westward and birthed one of history's most aggressively sanctimonious slogans: Manifest Destiny. The belief that Americans were divinely ordained to spread coast to coast like spoiled mayonnaise. Of course, it wasn't called conquest, it was called progress. It wasn't expansionism, it was Providence with a wagon. And if your village happened to be in the way, well, you were clearly on the wrong side of God's zoning plan. The intellectual scaffolding for this imperial shuffle came from the likes of John O'Sullivan, a newspaper editor who, like many opinion columnists, confused verbosity with wisdom. He declared it America's, quote, destiny to overspread the continent, which is a very polite way of saying, we want your land and we're bringing guns and Jesus. The religious crowd, they lapped it up. After all, what could be holier than transforming wild, unspoiled lands into strip malls and cemeteries? Missionaries followed the settlers, handing out Bibles in one hand and smallpox in the other. The tribes who'd been living there for centuries were described as barriers to civilization, obstacles to commerce, and other euphemisms that made it easier to bulldoze their teepees without losing sleep. Sounds like the Middle East. To be fair, some settlers did feel bad, briefly. They wrote letters about noble savages and tragic necessities, then promptly returned to planting corn on the graves of people they'd relocated. And let's not forget the government's role as sort of divine realtor in waistcoats. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, for instance, politely escorted entire nations off their ancestral lands and deposited them in a part of the country known at the time as absolutely nothing. This led to the Trail of Tears, which was not a metaphor. It was an actual trail of actual tears and dysentery. But expansion wasn't just about stealing land. It was about exporting an ideal, a vision of white, Protestant, property-owning, tobacco-chewing masculinity. Towns were renamed, territories sliced and diced, railroads laid like arteries of empire, and every act of theft was draped in the American flag and blessed by a man with a mustache and questionable theology. But the time the country reached the Pacific, it had convinced itself that the whole thing had been inevitable. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files, CaryHarrison.com. Reading to you some passages of the book that I'm writing called A MAGA History of the United States. It's just been a powerful urge to put down how we got to where we are so that you and me, we together can navigate an easier future and not get hoodwinked by the intoxication of social media and all of the nonsense, including the mainstream media being bought up by the president of the United States. Wow, that's kind of amazing. So much for the Hatch Act. We're going to open up the phones coming up to get your feedback back on everything that's going on, but I'm just setting the table in advance. Let's jump into the Civil War. This is my chapter 12. A family reunion with cannons. By the mid-1800s, the so-called United States was less a functioning democracy and more a chaotic group project gone wildly off the rails. The North was busy inventing factories, moral superiority, and wage slavery. The South was clinging on to an economy built entirely on human bondage and denial. And the West? It just wanted to shoot buffalo, displace more indigenous nations, and mine gold while pretending not to notice the screaming match between the roommates. The Constitution, crafted, hold on, new word. We're never going to use that again. Crafted by powdered wig idealists who could try reading your own words. They look great. They're easy to do when you put them down, but you know, I'm doing like a real-time live audiobook here. Inserted statement here. When people record audiobooks, and I've done a bunch, you get like 68,000 takes per sentence. It takes months to record an audiobook, and they're all assiduously edited into perfection. I'm performing this real time. So I'm going to flub a word every now and then, and I really appreciate your kindness in allowing me to do that. Here we are, my MAGA history of the United States that I'm writing. We're looking at passages from it. The Constitution, crafted by powdered wig idealists who couldn't quite decide whether liberty applied to everyone or just the landowning class with a good tailor. It left America with a couple of unresolved issues, chief among them, whether enslaving human beings was economic necessity or merely biblically justified kidnapping with better marketing. Slavery was the rotting corpse at the national dinner table. The South called it a peculiar institution, as I said before. And into this national hot mess walked my ancestor, Abraham Lincoln. Tall, tragic, awkward, morally upright enough to be suspicious. He didn't run for president to end slavery. He ran to keep this union intact. South Carolina seceded first, naturally, because someone had to be dramatic. This is, after all, the home of Lindsey Graham. There's some dramatic stuff for you there. 10 other states followed like jealous execs who couldn't stand to see the Union happy. This began the Civil War, also known as America's 4-year attempted suicide by cannonball. The Confederacy, bless its treasonous heart, styled itself as a noble republic, valiantly defending the sacred right to own other people. In reality, it was a fever dream of aristocratic cosplay, Jeffersonian fantasy, and deeply selective Bible quoting. Their first act, shell a federal fort. Their second, beg Europe to support them with the diplomatic subtlety of a telegraph reading, please validate us. Europe passed politely. Even Queen Victoria wasn't touching that mess. Though Britain did flirt with the idea, like a colonial ex-drunk dialing at 2 a.m. Curious, but not ready to commit. The notion of taking back the colonies with a bill-out Southern plantation production system, well, was intriguing. Imagine all that free stuff that the crown once had to have it once again. But they knew that if Abraham Lincoln got his way, all bets would be off. And the Union was flailing, at least for that moment. Its first generals were mostly retired museum exhibits who treated battle strategy like gentlemen's cricket. Thousands of young men marched off in wool uniforms designed to attract bullets and repel common sense. The battlefields were blood-drenched theater stages. Shiloh, Chickamauga, starring mud, starring dysentery, starring bayonets in horrifying technicolor. If bullets didn't get you, the doctors would. Amputations were done with whiskey and optimism. Anesthesia was just a theory. Germ theory was, well, still in development. Hospitals were basically barnyards with extra pus. Then in 1863, Lincoln dropped the Emancipation Proclamation, a partial, pragmatic, and profoundly symbolic mic drop. It didn't free all the slaves, but it did change the stakes. The war was no longer just about the Union, it was about morality. It was about identity. It was about whether America could pretend to be a free country while keeping millions in bondage. The turning point came at Gettysburg. 3 days of carnage that ended with Pickett's charge, a suicidal assault led by men who clearly hadn't read the room. Lincoln showed up later, scribbled those 272 words in the back of an envelope, and managed to redefine the nation while sounding like a disappointed parent. By 1865, the Confederacy was collapsing faster than a Southern belle's corset in a heat wave. Sherman marched to the sea, torching plantations and dreams all along the way, and Lee surrendered at Appomattox, looking every bit like a man who had bet it all on cotton and lost to iron. And just as victory arrived, Lincoln was shot in the head by John Wilkes Booth, a failed actor with daddy issues and delusions of Confederate grandeur. The war ended not with a triumphant cheer, but with the gasping sob of a country that realized it had won, but at a cost so brutal it barely recognized itself. The slaves were free, the South was wrecked, the nation was whole. Not really. The Civil War didn't solve America's contradiction. It just aired them in 4D with fire, steel, and sorrow. And it proved three things. One, you can build a nation on a contradiction. You just can't expect it not to implode. Two, you can win a war without winning peace. Three, if you don't finish the work of justice, history will keep circling back like a starving vulture with a bayonet. So let's fast forward here, shall we? We have Reconstruction. First came the amendments. The 13th ended slavery, except as punishment. A loophole so generous, it would later birth chain gangs, convict leasing, and a prison system that could have been designed by Satan's accountant. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship. The 15th promised voting rights. It was revolutionary ink applied to a nation already reaching for the eraser. And here we are today, grabbing the eraser and using it. Enter Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's replacement, and history's most compelling argument for stronger secession rules. A Southern Democrat. Actually, let's say succession rules. Ooh, double meaning, even more fun. Andrew Johnson was a Southern Democrat who despised secession but loathed black equality even more. Johnson believed Reconstruction should be gentle, forgiving, and above all, very white. His vision of healing involved welcoming former Confederates back into power before the ashes cooled, because nothing rebuilds trust like letting traitors rewrite the rules. Andrew Johnson vetoed civil rights protections like they were personal insults. Congress overrode him. He kept vetoing. Congress impeached him. He survived by one vote, proving, even then, that America had a deep emotional attachment to failing upward. Meanwhile, freed people did something deeply offensive to the Southern psyche. They behaved like citizens. They built schools. They built churches, newspapers. They voted. They organized. They ran for office. Some even made it to Congress. Men who had been property were now writing laws, while former plantation owners foamed quietly in their parlors. It was miraculous. It was unprecedented. And it triggered a full-blown white meltdown. Poof, the Ku Klux Klan is born, misspelled entirely. America's original homegrown terrorist organization and spiritual ancestor of every grievance-fueled hate group that followed up until today. Not yet ironic or merchandised, the Klan was a night-riding enforcement arm of white panic. It was burning, it was beating, it was lynching, and it was murdering with the clear goal of replacing democracy with fear. Elections were canceled by violence. Nobody stormed the Capitol yet, but elections were canceled by violence. Ballots were answered with bullets. States' rights became code for, we'd like to keep killing people, please. The federal government did notice, troops were deployed, laws were passed, arrests were made, but justice flickered like a dying gas lamp. Then the North, well, it got bored because Reconstruction was messy. It was bloody, it was politically inconvenient, and most importantly, Wall Street wanted railroads, not racial justice. Northern voters developed a sudden allergy to Black suffering, especially when it interfered with profits and dinner plans. The national mood shifted from finish the work to haven't we done enough? And so in 1877, America quietly sold out Reconstruction in a backroom deal known as the Compromise of 1877, a bargain so cynical it deserves its own plaque in hell. Federal troops were pulled out, Southern elites reclaimed power, Black Americans were abandoned with the efficiency of a bad divorce settlement. And what followed was Jim Crow, a meticulously engineered system of racial control disguised as law and tradition. There were poll taxes. In other words, you paid a tax if you wanted to vote. If you didn't have a job, you couldn't pay the tax. Therefore, you couldn't vote. And who might not have a job after slavery is abolished and might not have the money to pay the tax to be able to vote? And they came up with literacy tests because property was not allowed to go to school. So if you were enslaved, you couldn't read. Now, today, literacy tests would actually be a benefit, wouldn't they? I'm going to let you think about that for 10 more seconds. It's not part of the Constitution. It's not the spirit of what we're doing here, but probably not a bad idea today. Segregation, everywhere. Lynching became civic entertainment. Freedom existed in theory like unicorns or bipartisan ethics. Reconstruction is often called a missed opportunity, and that's charitable. It was a moral collapse in real time, a radical experiment in justice strangled by cowardice, by comfort, and the American instinct to declare victory halfway through the fire. The Civil War ended. Reconstruction proved something far worse. You can win a war and still lose your soul. You can write equality into law and erase it with indifference. And if you abandon justice even one time, history doesn't forgive you, it haunts you. It shows up every election cycle and demands interest. The ghosts didn't leave, they just learned how to vote and then how to suppress it. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files. I'm having fun reading selections of the book I'm putting together for you called A MAGA History of the United States. Let me just jump over to YouTube and read. Long ago, I saw the video of a professor's seminar explaining that slavery abolition was a cover-up for firing slaves without pay to be replaced with spinning machines which cost nothing to operate. Bingo! There it is. Just like what we're seeing today. It's almost like a phone call, but it's a YouTube comment. It's like today where this technocracy that we're seeing, where a third of the federal government has been canceled, where people are being replaced by AI on purpose, and robotics on purpose, because robots don't take vacations, they don't eat, they don't get unemployment compensation. And with technocracy, you can control and run everything automatically. So the dozen or so people at the very top that own everything get to take all the profits. And the rest of the people are willing to work for a nickel an hour just to be able to eat. And that's the plan, unless it's reversed. And you might have some thoughts on how to do that. You can go to CaryHarrison.com. You get a newsletter. I'm going to put the entire text of this broadcast in there so you can read it for free and for fun. Also know that I'm putting this into a book. I'm going to find somebody who could actually turn it into book format. I could do it, but it would take me like 4 years with the cover art and all the rest of it. I can do it, really. I mean, We're live streaming right now on Substack, on Instagram, on YouTube, on LinkedIn. So all this technology I put together myself, but it takes forever. And formatting a book, too much, too forever, and then I'm not writing it because I'm busy formatting it. So I've learned that lesson. It's worth the $35 to get it done right. We're going to jump right now into World War I, okay? This was a game changer for us. The Great War, or how Europe committed suicide over a seating chart. Millions died because everyone had alliances, everyone had mustaches, and terrible conflict resolution skills. By 1914, Europe was a tinderbox, soaked in kerosene, stacked with explosives, and supervised by men who thought honor was stored in cavalry uniforms. Every empire was armed to the teeth, deeply insecure, and absolutely convinced that someone else was about to start something. All it needed was a spark. Enter Gavrilo Princip, a malnourished nationalist with a pistol and a lunch schedule. He assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo after a series of bungled attempts that suggested fate itself was a drunk. One dead Archduke later, Europe looked at the smoking gun and collectively said, excellent excuse. And just like that, a regional mess turned into a planetary bloodbath thanks to a dazzling web of alliances that no one fully understood, but everyone felt legally obligated to honor. Austria-Hungary threatened Serbia. Russia threatened Austria-Hungary. Germany threatened Russia. France threatened Germany. Britain threatened everyone who looked at Belgium funny. And diplomacy collapsed faster than a Jenga tower built by men in monocles. Thus began World War I, also known as let's solve the 20th century with 19th century thinking and industrial scale murder. The generals, God bless their starched uniforms, expected a short, glorious war. Some marching, some charging, maybe a decisive battle or two, home by Christmas. What they got instead was trench warfare, a system so stupidly cruel, it feels like a practical joke played on an entire generation. Picture this: millions of men living in muddy ditches, surrounded by rats, surrounded by lice, rotting corpses, surrounded by the lingering stench of fear and human waste. Then they charged machine guns with bayonets because honor demanded it. Machine guns, meanwhile, did not care about honor. They cared about efficiency. My grandfather, by the way, was in France in 1917. I have a picture of him and his battalion. He went through that, wrote a memoir, which I'm going to rewrite and share with you, all about the mile of horse corpses and what it was like from there. These are important messages so that we don't continue to repeat this history. In World War I, artillery pulverized landscapes into moonscapes. Gas attacks turned lungs into soup. Shell shock, which we now call PTSD, was treated as cowardice, and soldiers were shot for refusing to climb out of trenches and die politely. This they thought was progress. Technology advanced faster than morality could keep up. Tanks were introduced, mostly to break down. Planes took to the skies, initially to wave at each other, then to shoot each other down. Submarines turned the oceans into floating death traps, and poison gas was deployed because apparently the Hague Conventions were more suggestions than rules. Meanwhile, civilians were drafted into starvation, into rationing, into propaganda, and grief. This was the era where the word propaganda was born and the concept was born. It was perfected in World War II, first by us, and then our man went to Germany and taught Joseph Goebbels everything. We'll get into that in a second. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files. You can get our free newsletter at caryharrison.com, reading to you passages from the book that I'm writing called A MAGA History of the United States. Kind of a cheeky look at history, but if you were taught history the way I was, the most boring, hideous, and then Napoleon in 1800, really, who cares? Then he walked 17.3 kilometers over. I don't care. Why? Why? They never said why. Just what? Never why. Why is everything. When you know why, then you get the what. You can also predict the what. You can also avoid the what to a certain degree. So in World War I, as I continue, empires cracked under the strain. The Ottoman Empire, Turkey, or Turkey, whatever we call it today, it disintegrated. Austria-Hungary collapsed like a badly assembled IKEA table. Russia imploded into revolution because nothing cures a monarchy like sending peasants to die for a czar who won't stop reading French novels. America watched from across the Atlantic, sipping neutrality and selling weapons, until German submarines started sinking ships and sending threatening telegrams that read like drunk texts to Mexico. In 1917, the U.S. joined the war. That's when my grandfather went, bringing fresh troops, fresh money, and fresh optimism to a conflict already drowning in corpses. The war ended in 1918, not with victory so much as exhaustion. Everyone was broke. Everyone was traumatized. An entire generation had been fed into the industrial meat grinder and turned into memorial statues. Then came the Treaty of Versailles, a document so vindictive it practically begged for a sequel. Germany was humiliated, saddled with impossible reparations. When we say impossible, I don't mean that like, metaphorically. No, like impossible reparations, like we're building it so that you can't repair it. You will permanently be in defeat. They were stripped of territory. They were blamed for everything short of original sin. And the treaty didn't end conflict. It scheduled it. World War I was sold as the war to end all wars, which is history's most aggressively incorrect slogan. It killed empires, it rewired borders, it radicalized politics, and it left enough unresolved bitterness to fuel the next catastrophe with interest. Millions died. Millions more were maimed. And for what? To prove that nationalism is a hell of a drug, that alliances are just group chats with artillery, and that when men in power mistake pride for destiny, the bill is always paid in blood. Europe survived barely. The world staggered forward, and history sharpened its knife for round two. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files, caryharrison.com. Reading to you some segments from my book that I'm writing called A MAGA History of the United States. If you get the newsletter, I'm going to send this to you for free and for fun, turning it into a book because history is more delicious with a nice gravy on it and an actual explanation of context as opposed to endless dates, the way I was taught. Just dates. Memorize the dates. Yeah, but who was this person? Shut up. Memorize the dates. No, not going to do it. All right, here we are, Chapter 15, World War II. The sequel nobody asked for, but everyone paid for. How humanity looked at the rubble of World War I and said, let's add genocide, air conditioning for tanks, and a doomsday button. World War II didn't arrive as a surprise. It arrived like a drunk who'd been loudly promising to come back all evening and then did, with friends, with weapons, and with unresolved childhood trauma. The First War had ended in a farce masquerading as justice. The Treaty of Versailles wasn't peace, it was a receipt. Germany was humiliated, bankrupt, and publicly blamed for everything short of the Black Plague. Its economy collapsed, its pride curdled, and its population simmered in resentment while the victors congratulated themselves for stability. Meanwhile, during this German collapse, you had this, giant Renaissance. Berlin was like the gay capital of Earth. Fledgling democracy was born, but into that fertile swamp slithered Adolf Hitler, a failed painter, successful hate influencer, and walking indictment of art school admissions committees. He took national humiliation, economic misery, and centuries-old anti-Semitism, blended them into a toxic smoothie, and sold it as destiny. Millions lined up for seconds because nothing unites people faster than promising greatness and blaming minorities for their misery and other countries with fewer weapons. Germany rearmed openly. Europe watched nervously. Germany was forbidden to rearm, period. That was the Versailles Treaty. But despite the laws, they did it anyway. Some other countries might be doing stuff despite laws anyway. Europe watched this rearming nervously. Britain and France responded with appeasement, which is diplomacy's equivalent of pretending the house isn't on fire because, well, the flames haven't reached the sofa yet. Austria disappeared. Poof. Czechoslovakia was carved up politely like hors d'oeuvres at a summit. Everyone nodded, everyone lied, everyone hoped the monster, Adolf Hitler, would be satisfied. And he wasn't. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland and introduced the world to blitzkrieg, war, but faster, louder, and with absurdly no regard for civilians. Tanks rolled, cities burned, the old rules died screaming. France collapsed so quickly, it barely had time to surrender properly. Britain clung to survival by sheer spite, powered by tea, by radar, and my computer screen says it's going to go to sleep in 5 minutes. Sorry, just pressing a button. See? Real-time performance. Real-time audiobook performance. I have to hit this button. Hold on. There we go. This is crazy. All right, I'm just going to ignore it. Better yet, ignore your computer. It will leave at some point. France collapsed so quickly, as I said, it barely had time to surrender properly. Churchill's speeches sounded like defiant growls translated into English. Meanwhile, Japan, watching Europe implode, decided it was a perfect time to build an empire through mass slaughter. China burned, civilians became targets, rape, famine, and biological experiments became policy. The Pacific turned into a floating graveyard. World War II rearranged the planet. Empires collapsed, superpowers emerged, the Cold War began warming up. The United Nations was born, armed with lofty ideals and very little enforcement power. Humanity gained both moral clarity and the means to obliterate itself, now in mere seconds. Evil doesn't always wear a snarl, you know. It often wears a uniform and smiles. Progress without ethics is just efficiency with a body count. And when civilization fails, it fails spectacularly. The war was won, the peace was complicated, and history once again started sharpening its knife. Cary Harrison with you. We're going to end right there. We are out of time. I have been reading from my book that I'm writing called A MAGA History of the United States. Don't forget to get the newsletter at caryharrison.com, C-A-R-Y. I'm going to send along this entire broadcast from today, giving you the tools to navigate the future, giving you the why of the history that we commonly share together. And I want to thank the great Renee Yawarski, our director, and my better half in this digital equation of fun, frolic, mayhem, and merriment, plus the great Will in the KPFK control room. Very much appreciate you, my friend. And I look forward to seeing everybody next week. Don't forget, you can catch this as a video anytime. Simply Google Cary Harrison YouTube or Substack or anything with a chip and a signal. You'll be able to find it. And I look forward to seeing you. Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, happy whatever it is that any of us celebrates or doesn't celebrate, if that's the case. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
This pussy grabs back. The Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.